I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who hesitated before opening her own bedroom door. Not because of a forgotten key, not because of something silly, but because of a feeling. That night, I stood there, hand frozen on the doorknob, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. The hallway was quiet, too quiet. That thick kind of silence that feels like it's waiting for something to break it. I didn't know then, but what waited behind that door would be the first crack in everything. I thought was stable. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a fight. It was just a moment that shifted something inside me. But before I get to that, you need to understand the kind of woman I was before that night. I lived in a house that looked perfect. You know, the kind, freshly. Cut lawn, flowers by the window, smiles in every family photo. But inside, I had grown invisible. Somewhere between laundry cycles and late-night dinners. I had stopped existing as a woman and became just background. I'm not here to paint myself as a saint. I'm also not some kind of villain. I was just someone tired of being unnoticed. And sometimes what shakes us most isn't what we see, but what it makes us feel. There was something I witnessed that night. Not wrong, not inappropriate, but enough to make me realize how detached I had become from the life around me. It wasn't what someone did. It was how much I had forgotten to feel, how numb I had become. And in that realization, a door inside me opened far louder than the one in front of me ever could. Have you ever lived in one of those houses that looks picture perfect from the outside? Clean porch, fresh flowers, a husband who smiles in photos and nods during dinner. That was my life. But inside it was just a quiet performance. A man who worked long hours who spoke to me like we were running a company together. And the space between us, it had become so wide I stopped even trying to bridge it. I used to count how many times. A week, he looked at me, really looked. At some point, one lost track. Or maybe I just stopped hoping. Then came Lucas. 19. Respectful. Kind, but always guarded. He had just moved in after some trouble with his mother. I didn't ask questions. It wasn't my place. I treated him with care, kept everything polite, tidy, appropriate. I cooked, I asked about his classes, stayed in my lane. Still, sometimes I'd catch a look in his eyes. One that mirrored something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Not attraction, not even attention. Just a shared kind of heaviness. Like we both knew what it was like to feel out of place in your own home. They say people who carry quiet pain can recognize it in each other. Maybe that's true, but I never crossed a line. I didn't plan for what happened. I didn't expect that one night everything would shift. Not because of what he did, but because of what I saw, and more importantly, what it stirred in me. It wasn't some inappropriate act. It was a private moment. A flicker of something raw, unfiltered. The kind of thing you see once and can't unsee. Not because it's wrong, but because it wakes something in you thought was long dead. What shook me most wasn't the moment itself. It was how much it reminded me of the woman I used to be. Before the silences, before the walls. I stood there holding a secret I couldn't name. And if you've ever walked through your house feeling like a ghost, if you've ever passed a mirror and not recognized the woman staring back, then maybe you'll understand. This isn't a story about blame. It's about how quickly we lose ourselves and how sometimes the smallest moments reveal just how far we've drifted. If you've ever stood in a hallway, afraid of what silence might say more than sound ever could, you'll understand what I mean. That house of ours, quiet, polished, presentable, felt more like a showroom than a home. The flowers were fresh, the curtains always drawn just right. But what lived inside wasn't warmth, it was performance, habits, tasks, checklists. I used to think being a stepmother would mean guidance, a soft place to land. But somewhere along the way it turned into another role to play, another thing to manage. Grocery lists, laundry, dinner, asking Lucas how school was, smiling through meals where no one said much. He was polite always, quiet, carried something in. His posture that felt familiar. But I never crossed any line. I just noticed things. The kind of things you only notice when you've been invisible long enough to see everything. I'm 38. I've been married 7 years. For a long time, I told myself I was lucky. Tom, my husband, was successful, reliable, always made sure the bills were paid. The fridge was full, the future secure. He gave me safety. But slowly, safety stopped. Feeling like love. It started feeling like distance in disguise. He stopped sitting close. Stopped looking at me. I don't even think it was deliberate. I think he just forgot how. Forgot how to talk to me without glancing at his phone. How to listen without drifting off. How to ask how I was and wait for an honest answer. Our conversations became updates, logistics, reminders. We were living in the same space, but on different timelines. He traveled a lot. Conferences, meetings, business dinners that turned into overnights. Sometimes he'd text. Sometimes he wouldn't. I never knew whether to feel worried or relieved. But the hardest part wasn't the absence. It was the quiet, not peaceful quiet. The kind of silence that echoes off the walls because no one is reaching for anyone anymore. I found myself spending more and more time in that silence, listening to the hum of appliances, watching shadows shift across the floor, wondering when I stopped feeling like a person and started feeling like part of the furniture. If you've ever walked past a mirror and blinked because the woman staring back didn't look like someone you remembered, then maybe you understand. If you've ever carried an ache in your chest so persistent it started to feel normal, then you'll know why that night at that door I hesitated. Not because of what I might find on the other side, but because I wasn't sure who I would be once. I opened it. The distance between people isn't always measured in miles. It's often measured in silence. And the silence in our house, it grew heavier after Lucas moved in. Lucas was Tom's son from a previous marriage. 19. Soft-spoken, respectful. He was supposed to stay with his mother, but something happened between. No one said much. One day he wasn't there. The next he was carrying boxes into the guest room down the hall. I didn't know how to feel. He wasn't my child, but the moment I saw the wariness in his eyes, I felt responsible. Not like a mother. Not like a friend. Just someone who didn't want him to feel invisible under this roof the way I had. So I started doing more. Cooking real meals again. Leaving notes on the fridge. Asking about his classes. Sometimes all I got in return was a shrug or a soft, "It's fine." But I kept asking. Kept trying. Maybe because I didn't know how else to feel useful anymore. He was polite, always. But there was a quiet sadness to him. Like he was carrying something heavier than a 19-year-old should. And there were moments, fleeting, unspoken, where I caught him noticing things, not me, not the way I looked, but maybe the way I was disappearing. Maybe the way I walked more softly now, or the way I kept touching the same cold teacup, like it might hold warmth if I waited long enough. And maybe that's what shook me, 'cause Tom hadn't seen that in a long time. Hadn't seen me in a long time. He saw the grocery list, the insurance paperwork, the dinners. But not the woman behind the smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Lucas didn't say much, but his silence wasn't the shutting kind. It didn't push me away like Tom's. Just made room. A space where I didn't have to pretend for a minute, not to talk, not to explain, just to exist. The house didn't help. It was too perfect, spotless, cold, not a cushion out of place, not a photo frame crooked. You'd think that would make you feel secure. But all it did was remind you not to touch anything, not to disturb the illusion. Sometimes late at night I'd walk past the mirror in the hallway and catch a glimpse of myself. And I wouldn't recognize her, that woman in the silk robe with tired eyes and practiced stillness. I used to be so full of motion, laughing too loud, dancing barefoot in the kitchen. Now I moved like a whisper. If you've ever lived in a house full of people but felt like you were the only one who remembered how to breathe, then you'll understand. This isn't a story about blame. It's about becoming invisible, and how sometimes The gentlest shift in attention can make you remember that you were once a person, not just someone else's wife. Not just someone step anything, just someone. There are moments that don't shout. They whisper. They sneak up on you in the quiet, in the way the dishes are done without a word, in how three people can sit at a dining table. And yet the room still feels empty. Tom would scroll through his phone between bites. Lucas kept his eyes on the plate. And me, I smiled. I asked how their days were. I cleared the dishes. Then I stood at the sink long after everything was clean, just letting the silence settle around me like fog. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't peace. It was something in between. I don't know when. Lucas's presence stopped feeling like an interruption and started feeling like a reminder. A mirror, maybe. Not of who I was to him, but of who I had been to myself. He noticed small things. A different necklace. The part in my hair. He said thank you when no one else did. Not in a dramatic way, just quiet, consistent, human. It wasn't affection. It wasn't attraction. It was something simpler. Recognition. That quiet moment when someone sees the part of you that even you have. Stopped acknowledging that kind of awareness. It doesn't scream. It hums. It lingers. And sometimes it changes everything without meaning to. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. My meeting had been canceled and Tom, as usual, was out of town. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark, except for one soft glow coming from Lucas's room upstairs. I stepped inside gently, as if not wanting to disturb something fragile. The floors creaked under my shoes. The air felt still, like the whole house was holding its breath. I didn't call out. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to feel what it was like to walk through that space unseen. As I climbed the stairs, I heard something. Not a voice, not music. It's just a faint, distant rhythm, one I couldn't quite place. I paused. At the landing, Lucas's door was slightly ajar. A warm light spilling out in a thin line. I almost kept walking, told myself it wasn't my business, that I should let the house return to its stillness. But my feet didn't move. I wasn't trying to look. I didn't want to know. But in that instant, something shifted in me. Not because of what I saw or heard, but because of what it made me feel. Not desire, not scandal. Just the realization of how long it had been since I had been truly present in my own life. I turned away, closed my eyes, breathed in, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel numb. I felt human. Some truths don't hit you like a storm. They slip in quietly. Like a whisper that lingers in the air long after the words are gone. That night, I came home a little earlier than expected. The driveway was dark. The porch light was off. Only one room upstairs glowed softly. Lucas's eye stepped inside quietly, careful with every movement, as if I didn't want the house to know I was back. I told myself he was studying, that he might have fallen asleep with the lamp on, but something felt off. A stillness, a tension in the air like the moment before a glass shatters. As I walked up the stairs, I heard something from behind his door. A muffled noise, unfamiliar and strange, but I didn't stop. I didn't knock either. I just kept moving past, heart suddenly tight in my chest. I told myself it was in my place, that I wasn't going to intrude. But then I caught a glimpse, just a second. The screen of his laptop angled in a way that I could see a paused frame. A title I recognized, a file name that shouldn't have existed. Something that belonged in the past. Something private. Something Tom and I had once shared and thought was gone forever. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I didn't want to believe it. I backed away. Every step felt heavy, like wading through water. My fingers trembled as I closed the door to my bedroom. I stood there, staring at nothing. My mind was racing, but my body couldn't move. I felt violated, betrayed, not just because of what I saw, but because of the questions it raised. How did that video even exist? Why was it open? Had he found it by mistake? Or had he searched for it? The idea wrapped around me like ice. I sat on the edge of my bed trying to slow my breath, trying to understand. A part of me wanted to believe it meant nothing. Coincidence? An accident. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just the file. It was everything leading up to it. The looks, the silences, the subtle shifts I tried to explain away. The next morning, I said nothing. Poured coffee. I asked if he wanted toast. He nodded. Likealways.com. Polite. As if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just lost something I didn't even know I still valued. My sense of safety. We sat there. In the kitchen, the steam from our mugs rising between us like a curtain. I couldn't meet his eyes. And worse, I couldn't tell if he wanted me to. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's said. It's what's not. And in that silence, I realized things would never be the same again. Some things you wish you hadn't seen. Some truths you wish you could unknow. But once they're there, once they press themselves into your mind, they change everything. That morning, I moved through the house like a stranger. I folded laundry that didn't need folding, rearranged the pantry, wiped clean already clean counters. Anything to drown out the image in my head. That accidental moment from the night before. That had shattered something quiet but important inside me. I tried to convince myself it meant nothing. A mistake, a fluke, a moment that shouldn't carry meaning. But the longer the silence stretched, the harder it became to pretend. I wasn't just shaken by what I saw. I was shaken by what it revealed. Not about him, about me. Because for the first time in a long time, I saw myself through someone else's eyes. Not as a woman to be admired, not as someone to be wanted, but as someone who had forgotten how to set boundaries. Someone who had let loneliness blur the lines of decency and safety. And I hated that realization. It wasn't desire I felt. It was grief. Grief for who I had become. For what this house, this silence, this neglect had turned me into. I had been invisible for so long. I didn't realize how close I'd come to letting attention, any attention, be mistaken for connection. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table across from Lucas. He ate his toast like it was any other day, calm, polite. Nothing in his demeanor said he knew I had seen anything. But I couldn't meet his eyes. Not because I was ashamed of him, but because I was ashamed of the part of me that hesitated to act. That part of me that didn't immediately speak up. That didn't storm into the room and demand answers. It's that part that froze, unsure of whether I had lost my authority or my identity. So I said nothing. For one more day. But I knew something had to change. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't the secret itself. It's how long you let it live in silence before deciding to reclaim your voice. Sometimes what changes you isn't a kiss or a touch or a confession. It's a look, a silence. A moment when you realize someone sees you in a way they shouldn't. Started with small things, not actions, just awareness. I began noticing how quiet the house became when Lucas entered a room, how his presence shifted the air, how his footsteps slowed near me, how his eyes lingered, not rudely, not boldly, but long enough to make me wonder if I was imagining it. First, I told myself I was. But the truth is, I wasn't afraid of his attention. I was afraid of my response to it because, after years of being invisible, years of meals eaten in silence, of conversations that felt more like scheduling meetings, just being noticed felt dangerous in the wrong way. And that terrified me. I didn't seek it, but I didn't stop it either. And that hesitation, that failure to set a boundary, kept me up at night more than anything else. One afternoon, I came home from the store. Arms full of bags, exhausted. Before I could unlock the door, it swung open. Lucas stood there. He didn't say anything, just gently took the bags from my hands and carried them inside. It was a simple gesture, ordinary, but it unsettled me. Not because of what happened, but because of what I felt afterward. Something flickered in me. Unwelcome, confusing, and shameful. Not desire, not affection. Just this sudden fear that I'd gone too long without recognizing when a line had been crossed. Or worse, when it was slowly disappearing right under my feet. He looked at me and said softly, "You shouldn't have to carry everything by yourself." It was a kind statement, and yet something in the way he said it, in the quiet weight behind the words, made the air between us feel thinner. I thanked him. I turned away, and I told myself that was the last time I would ever ignore my instincts. Because there are moments in life when you feel something shift and you have a choice: step back or let it consume you. That night I didn't sleep. Not because of what had happened, but because of what almost did. Sometimes it's not what's said aloud that changes everything. It's the way someone listens, the way they pause and give space for your words like they matter. Lucas had a way of listening that felt unfamiliar. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it had been so long since anyone had done it. Our conversation started simple. Music, books, small things. But gradually they deepened. He asked about my life before Tom, about the things I used to love, about who I used to be. And I answered, not because I was seeking connection, but because for the first time in years someone remembered to ask. Tom had stopped asking long ago. Everything became practical, surface level. He assumed I'd manage. Grocery lists, dot bills, schedules, smiles, and I did, quietly, consistently. Until the silence swallowed parts of me I didn't realize I'd lost. One night Tom was away again. I sat alone in the living room, a half-full glass of wine in hand. It's an old movie playing softly in the background. Lucas walked past, then hesitated. He asked if it was okay to join. I nodded. He sat on the far end of the couch, not close, not intruding. We didn't talk. We just watched. A scene came on. A couple kissed on screen. My body tensed, not from desire, but from memory, from grief. From remembering how long it had been since I'd felt anything stir it. All, a few minutes later, I reached for the remote. He reached too. Our hands brushed. He pulled back instantly. "I'm sorry."